On the evening of November 16th, 1957, in Plainfield, Wisconsin, the sheriff, Art Schley, was investigating the disappearance of Bernice Worden. She had gone missing that day, and clues pointed towards Edward Gein, an antisocial man who lived alone in a farmhouse with lots of land. When Sheriff Schley arrived at the property, the house appeared empty, so he went inside the shed in search of Edward. He wandered deeper into the shed until he bumped into something hanging from the ceiling. He shined his flashlight on it, and the horrors he saw would be burned into his memory for the rest of his life. It was the body of Bernice Worden, decapitated, upside down, and naked. The cluttered, hoarder-esque home was consequently searched, and what was found was something only thought possible in nightmares. Authorities discovered dozens of artifacts made out of human body parts, including a woman's suit made out of real female flesh, soup bowls made out of skulls, masks made of real human face skin hanging on walls, and much, much more. Ed was quickly located and arrested, and though he initially refused to confess, he eventually cracked. He told investigators what had compelled him to create this house of horrors, and as in most cases, it stemmed from his childhood. Ed was born on August 27, 1906, to George and Augusta Gein in La Crosse, Wisconsin. He had a brother who was 4 years older than him, named Henry. Ed didn't grow up in the most conventional family, with his mother being the dominant force in his life rather than his father. Augusta despised George for being an alcoholic and being unable to hold a job. She was also radically religious with very strong, unrelenting beliefs. One of these beliefs was that divorce was unacceptable, causing her to stay with George and overpower him, possibly driving him further into alcoholism. She forced her beliefs upon her children, with little Ed being especially susceptible to her teachings. Augusta caused Ed to gain an extremely warped view of society, especially when it came to women, through preaching about the danger of the devil, alcohol, and lust. She told her sons that all women were whores, apart from herself, of course, and read them Bible verses mainly concerning death, violence, and murder. She painted a very dark picture of the world, and kept her boys isolated and uninfluenced. Ed came to idolize her and form an unhealthy obsession towards her. George owned a grocery store in La Crosse, but Augusta eventually took over the shop in 1911 due to thinking George was doing a poor job at running the business. Eventually, she sold the store and used the money to move to a 195-acre farm in Plainfield, Wisconsin. Now with her family moved into solitude, she used the isolation of the farm to keep outside influences away from her boys. Ed did get outside interaction at school, but he wasn't able to form any close friendships, because when he tried, his mother would scold him. Due to the little social interaction he had, he was socially awkward and displayed odd behavior, often laughing at seemingly nothing. His classmates would sometimes bully him for standing out. However, he did quite well in school grade-wise, especially in reading. He was described as a small, shy boy, and he kept his distance from girls due to his mother's teachings. His lack of interaction with the opposite sex fostered an even stronger obsession with his mother. This behavior continued for the next 25 years, with the whole family still living together in the farmhouse, and Ed now being 34 years old. Ed's father, George, suddenly passed away due to a heart attack in 1940 that was likely caused by his heavy drinking. The rest of the family stayed together, and the two boys, now men, worked odd jobs around town to help pay the bills. Ed's older brother, Henry, grew to dislike living at the farm and longed for a life of his own. He would frequently badmouth their mother, much to the dismay of Ed, who still idolized her even as an adult. The next event that changed the course of Ed's life was on May 16, 1944, when Ed and Henry were doing a controlled burn to keep marsh vegetation away from the farm. Unexpectedly, the flames got out of control, and the brothers struggled to put it out on their own, eventually splitting up. The fire department arrived, but Henry was nowhere to be seen. Ed reported him missing, and the authorities organized a search party to find him. Strangely, Ed led this search party directly to Henry, who laid dead on land untouched by fire. He had 2 bruises on his head, hinting that something or someone may have killed him. However, these strange circumstances didn't set off any alarms for police, as they didn't think Ed was capable of murder. They dismissed foul play and sent Henry's body to the coroner, where the cause of death was listed as asphyxiation. To this day, it is still unknown if Ed was responsible for the death of his brother, though he may have had a motive to kill him after Henry disrespected their mother. Now with his brother and father dead, the only two people left in the house were Ed and his manipulative, controlling mother. Though soon after, in 1945, she fell ill. She developed cancer and had a series of strokes, leaving only Ed to take care of her. His mother would sometimes verbally abuse him and tell him he was growing up to be just like his father. Other times, she would talk to him softly, comfort him, and even let him sleep in the same bed as her, as a nearly 40-year-old man. She passed away on December 29, 1945, leaving Ed alone in the world to be consumed by his fantasies. He boarded up rooms that reminded him of his mother and never touched them again, leaving them in pristine condition. However, the rest of the house became filthy and cluttered. Now living in squalor, he began reading stories about Nazis and cannibals, particularly taking a liking to the stories of Ilse Koch, a war criminal who made lampshades and other items out of human skin. At this point, Ed escalated his fantasies from fiction to real life. He enlisted the help of a friend who he later referred to as Gus, and proposed a plan to exhume graves under the guise of medical experiments. Gus, who was also a loner but good friend of Ed, agreed to this. Together, they took nocturnal trips to the graveyard to rob the graves of recently deceased women, especially those who resembled his own mother. Sometimes he would take the whole body, or other times cut off pieces, and then recover the grave as if nothing had happened. He'd drive the corpse back to his house and began turning his home into something truly disturbing. He heightened and escalated even the most gruesome of stories he had read, turning them into reality. This went on for years, with him robbing a total of 9 graves. However, his accomplice Gus eventually had to move into assisted living and was now unavailable to help him continue the operation. Ed had to turn to new means of obtaining body parts. A local tavern owner named Mary Hogan vanished on December 8, 1954. There was a blood trail from the tavern floor to the parking lot, as well as an empty bullet cartridge. However, there was no useful evidence linking anyone to the crime, but little did police know, this was the doing of Ed Gein. Ed would go uncaught for 3 more years until he decided to strike again. The victim he chose was local shop owner Bernice Worden. On November 16, 1957, he entered the shop, purchased antifreeze, and shot Bernice with a .22 caliber rifle. He later claimed that he wasn't sure if he had shot her intentionally or if it was an accidental misfire, due to him being in a dazed state at the time. He then took her back to his house, leaving a crucial piece of evidence behind, the sales receipt. There was also blood on the ground, as well as an open cash register. Bernice's son, Deputy Sheriff Frank Worden, entered the shop around 5 p.m. that day, discovering the crime scene. The only lead police had pointed in the direction of Ed Gein, and Sheriff Art Schley pursued it. He arrived at Ed's home, but received no answer when knocking at the door. He went to the shed, where he saw the horrible sight of Bernice Worden's lifeless body. More police were called to the scene, as well as in search of Ed, who was obviously guilty of Miss Worden's disappearance and murder. Ed was arrested at a local grocery store while police began the shocking search of his house of horrors. Miss Worden's body was only scratching the surface. Immediately entering the house, it was obvious that something was not right. It was filthy and extremely cluttered, making it hard to even walk through. For the rest of that day and into the next, police discovered dozens of ghoulish artifacts made by Ed. They found human bones scattered throughout the house, including female skulls, some with the tops sawn off and turned into soup bowls. There was also skulls found mounted on Ed's bedposts. Police found a wastebasket made out of human skin, as well as several chairs throughout the house upholstered with human skin. They found 9 masks made from female human faces that were mounted on the wall, kept in pristine condition. A woman's suit was found, which consisted of leggings made out of leg skin and a shirt made of skin, complete with female breasts. A shoebox containing 9 vulvas were found, 2 of which may have belonged to victims as young as 15 years old. There was also a belt made of female nipples, a lampshade made out of the skin of a human face, several female fingernails, a curtain drawstring with a pair of lips sewn onto it, and a doorbell made out of a female nipple. Bernice Worden's heart was also found, as well as her head, in a burlap sack. The head had nails driven in through the ears, with twine connecting them, as if Ed was planning to hang the head as a trophy. Ed, now in custody, refused to confess to anything, but was quickly worn down and began to divulge information. It was assumed that the body parts had all come from women he murdered, but Ed told them about his graveyard visits, of which there was as many as 40 of. Investigators were skeptical of this and had him lead them to the sites he had dug up. 3 graves were opened and confirmed to have been stolen from, making his claims credible. Ed explained how after his mother's death he had begun creating a woman's suit so that he could embody his own mother. He told investigators he didn't have sex with any of the bodies as they smelled too bad. He also claimed that he was unable to recall many of the details of the grave robberies and murders, as he claimed he was often in a dazed state when carrying them out. Sheriff Schley, who had discovered Bernice's body, was the lead investigator in this case. However, he died from heart failure before the case went to trial. His friends and family claimed he was severely traumatized from the case, and the stress that resulted had led to his death. There were many other missing persons cases that Ed was now suspected of, but there was no evidence linking him to any, and lie detector tests seemingly exonerated him. With the farmhouse now abandoned, his possessions were scheduled to be auctioned on March 30th, 1958. However, the house was burned down on the morning of March 20th, and it was never determined if the fire had been intentionally set or not. Regardless, the auction still went on, with what remained of his items, including the car he had used to haul his victims' bodies. The car would later be used as a tourist attraction. Initially, Ed was diagnosed with schizophrenia and deemed unfit to stand trial. Consequently, he was sent to a mental hospital in the meantime, but 11 years later, in 1968, doctors determined that he was mentally competent enough to stand trial. He was found guilty of the murder of Miss Worden, but he was also found legally insane, preventing him from being sent to prison. He spent the rest of his life in mental hospitals for the criminally insane. Tragically, the families of the victims felt that his sentence was unfair and that they didn't get justice for the victims. Ed died of cancer on July 26, 1984, at age 77, and was buried with his family in the very same graveyard that he had robbed from. He lived on in infamy, changing the genre of horror forever. Several movies and books were based on him, including Psycho, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and The Silence of the Lambs. Ed Gein changed the definition of horror with his morbid crimes and ghoulish artifacts, becoming one of the most infamous killers in history.